The water was still that morning. February 13th, 2018. Lake Coeur d'Alene stretched out under a pale winter sky, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang in the air like smoke. A small boat drifted near the shore, carrying a woman who was about to make a phone call that would unravel everything. 2 hours. That's how long she waited. 2 hours before dialing 911. 2 hours with the lake around her, silent and vast. 2 hours to think, to decide, to prepare what she would say. Her husband was no longer in the boat. The sunrise they had come to watch was long gone by the time help arrived. And when rescuers reached the scene, they found a woman with a bloody nose, shivering, telling a story about a man who had simply fallen into the water, a story about a romantic morning gone wrong, a story that, piece by piece, would fall apart. What really happened on that boat? Why the delay? And why did nothing about this woman's story quite add up? Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Larry Eisenberg was born in Idaho in 1950, a true local who spent his entire life in the state. He grew up surrounded by forests and lakes, the kind of landscape that would shape his entire life. From an early age, he understood the value of hard work, a principle he would carry with him every single day until his last. He attended the University of Idaho, where he earned a degree in forestry. It was the natural choice for someone who had grown up watching the timber industry pulse through his community. After graduation, Larry built a solid career in the lumber business, eventually rising to become an executive in the industry. Colleagues knew him as tough, disciplined, and relentlessly frugal. He wasn't the type to waste money, and he wasn't the type to tolerate laziness. In 1974, Larry married his first wife. Together they had 2 children, a daughter named Jessica and a son named Dean. He raised them with the same principles that guided his own life: work hard, stay honest, be a straight arrow. His kids remember him saying things like that all the time, drilling into them the importance of integrity and effort. The marriage lasted until the children were grown, and then, like many long unions, it quietly came to an end. Larry and Lori's paths crossed through the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce, where both were active members of the local business community. Some accounts suggest she was hired as his secretary while he was still married, and that their relationship began after both their marriages had ended. Either way, by the time they became a couple, they presented themselves as 2 people embarking on a new chapter together. Lori Barnes was born in 1953 into circumstances far different from Larry's steady Idaho upbringing. She grew up in a sect of the LDS Church, and her childhood was marked by serious poverty. There were periods when her family had so little that they squatted in empty farmhouses, moving from place to place, surviving on whatever they could find. Despite these beginnings, or perhaps because of them, Lori developed a personality that drew people in. She had a smile that seemed genuine and a giddy laugh that put others at ease. By the time she reached adulthood, she had learned how to make people like her, how to present a version of herself that inspired trust. At 19, in 1973, she married Stephen Barnes. Over the following years, they had 6 daughters together. Lori threw herself into motherhood and, by all outward appearances, created a stable home. Her daughter Amber would later describe their early family life as perfect: church every Sunday, lessons about living right, making good choices, getting good grades, doing chores. The structure that Lori had lacked in her own childhood, she seemed determined to build for her children. The marriage to Stephen lasted over 2 decades before ending in 1996. At 43 years old, Lori found herself a single mother, and she made a significant decision. She would start over in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. In this new city, Lori reinvented herself. She became deeply involved in community work, eventually earning the title of Volunteer of the Year from the Coeur d'Alene Chamber of Commerce. She was the kind of person who showed up at events, who remembered names, who made connections. Eventually, she rose to become the executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, a nonprofit organization tied to federal housing funds. It was a position of trust, a role that gave her access to significant resources meant to help those in need. To the outside world, Lori Barnes had overcome her difficult beginnings and become a pillar of her community. When Lori and Larry married, they brought together a blended family of 8 children, Larry's 2 and Lori's 6, along with 15 grandchildren and eventually a great-grandchild. It was a large, sprawling clan, and the couple embraced it fully. They owned a secluded cabin that they lovingly called Our Paradise, a place where the whole family would gather for holidays and celebrations. From the outside, the marriage looked like a fairy tale. Dean Eisenberg would later describe it as absolutely perfect. Friends used the word soulmates. A colleague who knew them both said Larry trusted Lori completely, without reservation. They traveled together constantly, visiting grandchildren, taking trips, building what appeared to be an ideal retirement. Lori's daughter, Chrislyn, would later recall how happy her mother seemed with Larry, noting the way he looked at Lori with genuine admiration. The stepchildren on both sides appeared to get along. Larry, despite being a tough and frugal man, had a warmth that extended to his new extended family. But certain details, invisible at the time, would later take on different meaning. Larry prided himself on fiscal responsibility. It was central to who he was, the man who taught his kids never to be lazy, never to waste, always to earn. He managed their money carefully, keeping track of every dollar. This was something Lori knew well, and yet there was something Larry didn't know, something that existed in a parallel world hidden from his view, growing larger and more dangerous with each passing month. The day was February 13th, 2018, a Tuesday, the day before Valentine's Day. Larry and Lori had plans. They would take their boat out on Lake Coeur d'Alene before sunrise to watch the dawn break over the water. It was the kind of romantic gesture that fit their public image as devoted partners. After the boat ride, they intended to have a special Valentine's breakfast together. They left their home while it was still dark, the winter cold, sharp, and biting. The lake was quiet at that hour, the water dark and calm. They launched the boat and headed out onto the water as the first hints of light began to appear on the horizon. According to Lori's account, everything was normal at first. They were out there together, watching the sky change colors, enjoying the peace of the early morning. Then, she said, something went wrong with the motor. Larry leaned toward it to investigate. He gave her a strange look. She would later mention something about stroke-like symptoms, a sudden change in his demeanor. And then he fell overboard, into the frigid February water. That was her version. What happened next, according to the official timeline, was a gap. a period of approximately 2 hours during which Lori did not call for help. When asked about this later, she explained that she didn't want to leave the area where Larry had fallen, that she was searching, that she was hoping. At approximately 2 hours after the incident, she finally dialed 911. When rescuers arrived, they found Lori with visible injuries, a bloody nose, which she explained came from trying to save her husband. The boat was intact. Larry was nowhere to be found. The water temperature that morning was in the low 40s. In water, that cold survival time without rescue is measured in minutes, not hours. The search for Larry Eisenberg began immediately after the 911 call. Divers entered the frigid lake, and rescue teams scanned the water for any sign of him. Days passed. The community watched and waited. Lori gave interviews, describing her grief, her shock, her devastation at losing her husband in such a sudden, tragic accident. About a week after the incident, Lori wrote a letter to friends and family, describing the morning in emotional detail, the trip to the lake, the accident, her desperate attempts to save him. The narrative she presented was one of a widow in mourning, but beneath the surface, investigators were already troubled. The 2-hour delay before calling 911 didn't sit right. The details of her story seemed to shift slightly with each telling. And then there were the injuries. Lori's bloody nose, which she attributed to rescue efforts, raised questions about what exactly had happened on that boat. On March 1, 2018, Larry Eisenberg's body was recovered from the lake, about 2.5 weeks after he disappeared. The discovery brought a measure of closure to those who had been waiting and hoping, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase, one that would reveal something no one expected. The autopsy that followed would change everything. When the medical examiner began the examination, they expected to find evidence consistent with drowning. A man in his late 60s falling into frigid water, his body submerged for weeks. The cause of death seemed obvious. But science told a different story. The medical examiner found something unexpected. Larry Eisenberg had not drowned. The cause of death was diphenhydramine toxicity, an overdose of Benadryl, the common antihistamine found in medicine cabinets across America. The concentration in his blood was 7,100 nanograms per milliliter, a level so far above therapeutic doses that it could only have been achieved through massive, deliberate ingestion. To put this in perspective, a normal dose produces blood levels far, far lower than what was found in Larry's system. This was no longer a tragic accident on a cold February morning. This was a homicide investigation. Suddenly, every detail took on new significance. The romantic sunrise trip, the motor problems, the strange look Lori described, the 2-hour delay, the letter to friends and family, carefully crafted to establish a narrative, the bloody nose. And then investigators discovered something else. On the very day Larry disappeared, Lori had been exposed publicly for a completely different crime, one that would provide the missing piece of the puzzle. The double life Lori Eisenberg had been leading for years was about to collapse. As executive director of the North Idaho Housing Coalition, Lori had access to federal funds intended to help low-income families with housing. Over a period of years, she had systematically stolen from this organization, creating false invoices and fake expenses, setting up shell companies in her daughters' names, and siphoning money into her own pockets and those of her children. The total amount she embezzled: over $500,000. 4 of her 6 daughters were implicated. Amber Hosking received approximately $16,500. Jessica Barnes received around $15,500. Tracy Tesh and April Barnes also received stolen funds. All 4 would eventually face federal charges. Larry Eisenberg knew nothing about this. The man who prided himself on fiscal responsibility, who taught his children to be straight arrows, who trusted his wife completely. He had no idea that she had been stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars and that federal investigators were closing in. The exposure was coming. And when Larry found out, his world would shatter. The woman he loved, the community leader he admired, the partner he trusted, she was a thief facing federal prosecution. The financial security he had worked his entire life to build would be threatened by restitution payments and legal fees. His reputation in the community would be tainted by association. Prosecutors would later argue that this impending exposure was the motive for murder. Lori couldn't let Larry discover the truth. She couldn't face the confrontation, the divorce, the complete destruction of the life she had constructed. And so, according to the prosecution's theory, she chose a different path. After Larry's death, Lori continued the deception. The letter to friends and family was part of it, establishing herself as a grieving widow, deflecting suspicion. But investigators found more troubling evidence of planning. Digital forensics revealed something chilling. While Larry and Lori were in Florida on their bucket list trip, someone had been conducting Google searches about drowning, currents, and deep water. The searches were traced to Lori. And there was another detail, small but significant. After Larry's disappearance, one of his friends received a text message that appeared to be from Larry's phone, but something was wrong with it. The message contained an emoji. People who knew Larry well said he never used emojis, ever. Phone records analysis showed that Lori, on the other hand, used them regularly. Then came the will. Investigators discovered handwritten changes to Larry's estate documents, changes that would have shifted 80% of his assets to Lori's 6 daughters, leaving only 20% to Larry's own 2 children, Dean and Jessica. The alterations had not gone through proper legal channels. They appeared to be part of a plan to redirect Larry's wealth after his death. The investigation into Larry Eisenberg's death moved on 2 parallel tracks: the federal embezzlement case and the state homicide investigation. The federal case moved first. Lori was arrested and charged with wire fraud and theft from programs receiving federal funds. The evidence was overwhelming: years of false invoices, fake companies, money trails leading directly to her and her daughters. In 2019, she pleaded guilty to the federal charges and was sentenced to 60 months in federal prison, plus ordered to pay full restitution and fines. But the murder case was more complex. Prosecutors needed to prove not just that Larry had been poisoned, but that Lori was responsible. The evidence, while compelling, was largely circumstantial. The pieces included the 2-hour delay before calling 911, the Google searches about drowning and currents conducted during their Florida trip, the diphenhydramine toxicity that had nothing to do with falling into water, the text message with the emoji sent from Larry's phone, the altered will documents, the timing of the exposure of the embezzlement, and the phone records that showed Larry had complained to his doctor about strange symptoms, shakes, and foggy thinking during their travels. Had Lori been poisoning him gradually, even before the boat trip? The symptoms Larry described to his doctor suggested he might have been ingesting something harmful without his knowledge. In February 2020, exactly 2 years after Larry's death, Lori Eisenberg was charged with first-degree murder. The charging documents cited aggravating factors, including the use of poison and lying in wait or torture. There was one complication, however. Prosecutors acknowledged they could not determine exactly how Larry ingested the fatal dose of diphenhydramine. Was it in his coffee? In food? In a drink on the boat that morning? The mechanism remained unclear. What was clear was that the level of the drug in his system was lethal, and that it hadn't gotten there by accident. The case did not go to a full trial. Instead, In 2021, Lori Eisenberg entered an Alford plea to second-degree murder. An Alford plea is a specific legal mechanism in which a defendant does not admit guilt but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to likely secure a conviction. It allows for sentencing without a full admission of responsibility, a legal technicality that would later cause significant pain to Larry's family. At the sentencing hearing, Lori spoke. She acknowledged that she was responsible for Larry's death, but her explanation stunned the courtroom. She claimed that she had intended to harm herself that morning, not Larry. She said she had prepared a drink laced with Benadryl for her own consumption, planning to end her own life because she couldn't face the exposure of the embezzlement. According to her account, Larry accidentally drank the poisoned beverage by mistake. The judge did not accept this version of events. Looking at the totality of the evidence, the Google searches, the altered will, the 2-hour delay, the text message with the emoji, the careful letter to friends establishing an accident narrative, the court found Lori's explanation implausible. It simply didn't fit the facts. Larry's family members addressed the court with raw emotion. His daughter Jessica McPherson spoke of the permanent hole in her soul left by her father's death, and the impossibility of finding closure when the person responsible still refused to tell the truth. She described how Lori's Alford plea, avoiding a full admission of guilt, felt like salt on the wounds. Even Lori's own stepdaughter, Amber, spoke against her. She testified that Larry had been a wonderful father figure and grandfather to her and her siblings. She told the court that her mother had manipulated the family and that she and her sisters did not support Lori, did not stand by her. Looking back, Amber expressed regret that she hadn't cooperated with investigators earlier, before the full scope of her mother's deception became clear. The sentence was life in prison with a minimum fixed term of 30 years before parole eligibility. Combined with her federal sentence for embezzlement, Lori Eisenberg will not be eligible for release until 2050, when she will be 97 years old. The case had split the family down the middle. Larry's 2 children lost their father and watched the woman who killed him escape a full murder conviction through a legal maneuver. They sat through hearings and sentencing, carrying grief that had no outlet, facing a woman who wouldn't fully admit what she had done. Lori's 6 daughters were left to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the woman who had stolen money using their names and then killed her husband to cover her crimes. The woman who had taught them to live right and make good choices had been living a lie for years, drawing them into her schemes, using their identities for fraud. One daughter, Chrislyn Woolston, had posted Lori's $75,000 bail after her arrest, believing in her mother despite the mounting evidence. When Lori later disappeared while out on bail, triggering a manhunt before she was eventually located, Chrislyn was left financially responsible for that bond. She later described the pain of realizing that her mother didn't care if she hurt her own daughter in her attempts to escape accountability. The woman who had raised her, who had taken her to church every Sunday, had abandoned her without a second thought. Another daughter, Amber, spoke publicly about the betrayal. On Dateline, she stated clearly, "We do not support her. We do not stand by her." The words carried the weight of shattered trust, of a mother-daughter bond irreparably broken. Lake Coeur d'Alene is still there, quiet and vast, reflecting the sky the way it did on that February morning in 2018. The water doesn't remember what happened. It just keeps moving, season after season, indifferent to the secrets that sank beneath its surface. Larry Eisenberg's children remember him differently than the headlines do. To them, he wasn't the victim in a murder case. He was the man who taught them about hard work and honesty. He was the father who took them hunting and fishing, who loved his dog Echo with pure, uncomplicated affection. He was someone who crossed items off his bucket list with childlike excitement, watching a rocket launch, riding a fan boat, learning to sail. At 68, Larry believed he had earned a peaceful retirement with a woman he loved. He trusted Lori completely. He had no idea that beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, a different reality was taking shape, one built on theft, deception, and ultimately, betrayal. The case raises questions that extend beyond one family's tragedy. How well do we really know the people closest to us? What secrets can hide behind a familiar smile, a giddy laugh, a reputation for community service? And how does someone go from Community Volunteer of the Year to convicted murderer? There are no easy answers. Lori Eisenberg's path from poverty to nonprofit executive to killer was paved with small deceptions that grew into larger ones, with financial pressures that mounted until they became unbearable, with a willingness to prioritize self-preservation above everything else, including the life of the man who loved her. Lori Eisenberg is currently incarcerated at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. She sits there with the consequences of her choices, while Larry's grandchildren grow up without him, while his children carry an absence that nothing can fill. The Paradise Cabin where the blended family once gathered sits empty of those memories now, its meaning forever changed. Some stories don't have neat endings. Some wounds don't heal with a verdict. But telling these stories matters, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to remember the people behind the cases. Larry Eisenberg was more than a crime statistic. He was someone's father, someone's grandfather, someone who believed in doing things the right way. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. Your support helps bring more cases like this one to light with the depth and respect they deserve. Because behind every headline, there's a human story waiting to be told. The stairwell was silent, just the echo of footsteps, a shadow gliding across the dim concrete. Seconds later, a scream tore through the courtyard, then a sickening thud. Neighbors rushed out, confused, startled, unsure of what they had just heard. When they looked up, there was no one on the landing. No struggle, no witness. Only the impossible question that would haunt this case forever. What really happened in those final seconds before Elena Agel fell? Because nothing about that moment, nothing about that night, matches the story that was written on paper. Are you ready for the darkest stories Britain has to offer? Introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British edition. 35 shocking true murder cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Available now on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, or grab your instant PDF download from our website. Links are in the description below. Don't miss out. Get your copy today. And now, let's continue with today's case. Elena Agel was born in 2003 in Iğdır, a quiet city in eastern Turkey, surrounded by rolling hills and small rural communities. She was the youngest child of Kemal and his wife, whose name was never made public. The Agol family lived a modest life, one built around school, work, and the close bonds of a typical Turkish household. By 2018, Alina's life seemed perfectly ordinary. She attended school, had a small but loyal group of friends, and loved spending time outdoors. Those who knew her described her as warm, cheerful, and full of dreams. But that same year, tragedy struck the family. Her older brother, 6 years her senior, drowned while swimming off the coast of Marmaris. The sudden loss devastated the family. For Alina, who had looked up to her brother all her life, the grief was almost unbearable. Still, she tried to move forward. By her final year of high school, she had found the strength to rebuild herself. She began taking private lessons to prepare for university entrance exams. Her teachers said she was determined to study and make her late brother proud. At the same time, her natural beauty and gentle personality had drawn a large following on social media. Friends and strangers alike admired her for her elegance and charm, a bright light in a town where everyone knew each other. Her father, still mourning his son, found comfort in Elena's ambitions. She was his last hope for a future that might bring peace to their broken family. But behind her smiles, Elena was fighting a secret battle, one that no one around her could see. On September 29, 2021, Elena walked into a police station trembling and pale. She told officers a horrifying story. For months, she had been harassed and blackmailed by a 42-year-old man named Gökhan, a married businessman and father of two. Gökhan was wealthy, the owner of a transport company and involved in real estate. His reputation in the community was that of a powerful and respected man. One of his sons, Gökturk, aged 19, attended the same school as Elena. Some people later claimed the two were romantically involved, but according to those close to her, their relationship never went beyond friendship. According to Elena's testimony, everything began when Gökhan discovered private photographs of her on his son's phone. Furious and possessive, he summoned Elena to his office. When she arrived, he confronted her with the images and threatened to share them with her family and friends. Terrified of being humiliated and ashamed, Elena did what he demanded. That day, Gökhan assaulted her. What followed was months of relentless abuse and manipulation. Elena told police that Gökhan forced her to meet him repeatedly, threatening to expose her photos and videos if she refused. He controlled her through fear, exploiting the trauma of her family's recent tragedy. Each time she tried to break free, he would send new threats, reminders of what he could destroy with a single click. 10 days before going to the police, Elena decided she couldn't take it anymore. She blocked him on every platform and stopped answering his calls. But the harassment only escalated. Gökhan created fake social media accounts to reach her, sending messages and appearing unexpectedly near her home. The night before she filed the complaint, he showed up at her doorstep. Out of fear and desperation, she agreed to step outside and talk to him in his car, hoping it would finally end the nightmare. But what unfolded next was far from peaceful. According to her later statement to police, Gökhan appeared intoxicated, his tone unstable, his behavior unpredictable. He told her they were going to his house. Elena refused. She had no intention of following him anywhere. She wanted the nightmare to end. Her refusal angered him. Gökhan's temper began to flare as he accused her of seeing another young man, basing his wild claims on supposed evidence he said he'd found on her social media. Elena denied everything. She told him she wasn't involved with anyone else. All she wanted was to be free from his control. But the more she tried to assert herself, the more violent he became. In her testimony, Elena described how Gökhan grabbed her by the arm with brutal force, shouting at her, his rage spiraling out of control. When she pushed back and tried to scream, He covered her mouth and nose with one hand, suffocating her until she nearly lost consciousness. The assault lasted only minutes, but it left her terrified and bruised. Somehow, she managed to break free and escape into the night. The following morning, she received a chilling message from Gokhan. In it, he told her to end her own life, or he would do it for her. That threat was the final blow for the already fragile young woman. Elena went to a doctor to have her injuries documented. The physician confirmed visible signs of physical assault. Armed with the medical report, Elena returned to the police station and formally filed charges against Gokhan. She accused him of blackmail, intentional injury, threats, defamation, and violation of privacy. But perhaps justice came too late. Just one day later, on the morning of September 30th, 2021, tragedy struck. Witnesses reported seeing Alina on the staircase of a five-story apartment building near her family's home. Moments later, she fell. When paramedics arrived, it was already too late. Alina had died instantly upon impact. She was only 18 years old. At first, authorities labeled her death a suicide, but almost immediately, inconsistencies began to surface. People who knew Alina could not believe she had taken her own life. She had recently enrolled in university prep courses, talked about her future with excitement, and had even written to police just a day earlier, begging for protection from Gokhan, the man she had accused of assaulting and blackmailing her. To those who had read her plea for help, the idea of suicide made no sense. Not after months of threats, not after the desperate attempts to escape him. As details emerged, anger spread across social media. Screenshots of Alina's earlier complaint circulated online, showing her fear and the lack of action from authorities. People began to see her death not as a personal tragedy, but as the final act of a system that had failed to protect her. Many called it what they believed it truly was: a murder disguised as suicide. Thousands of users, especially young women, rallied online under hashtags demanding justice. Their outrage quickly moved from screens to the streets. Local students and women's rights activists organized a march in her honor, determined to make her voice heard even after death. Although local authorities refused to authorize the demonstration, dozens gathered anyway, including Alina's grieving family, outside the municipal square. Holding banners and red roses, they chanted her name, demanding truth, accountability, and justice. They later walked to the apartment building where she had fallen, placing flowers and candles at the entrance. The site became a small memorial, a silent protest against the violence that had stolen yet another young life. At the same time, police were intensifying their investigation into Alina's death, determined to uncover what had really happened. During the search of her bedroom, investigators made a heartbreaking discovery. On her mirror, written in lipstick, they found a brief but haunting message, a direct accusation in which Alina held Gokhan responsible for her death. Beside the mirror lay a notebook filled with her final thoughts. Inside, she had written a letter addressed to her abuser. Her words revealed the depth of her suffering and painted a disturbing portrait of the man who had destroyed her peace. Elena described Gokhan as a neurotic person, incapable of compassion or basic humanity. She accused him not only of assaulting her, but also of abusing his own son's girlfriend. In the same note, she wrote that he had betrayed his friends by sleeping with their wives, and that he had tormented her relentlessly, breaking her down until, as she wrote, she could no longer bear to live. In the pages of that notebook, Elena described how he had manipulated and terrorized her for months, how his cruelty shattered her mental health and drove her to the edge. She said his complete lack of remorse showed a man without conscience. As police continued their investigation, they uncovered an earlier report revealing that Alina had previously attempted suicide on May 14, 2020. Back then, she had been stopped by bystanders near an unfinished building. Authorities had intervened just in time. In the days leading up to her death, Elena had desperately sought help. After enduring months of threats, harassment, and physical violence, she wrote a statement in her own handwriting, a final plea for protection. In that letter, she asked the authorities to keep her aggressor, Gokhan, away from her and to ensure her safety. Yet despite her courage to speak out, no formal action was taken. The police never initiated a case for sexual relations with a minor, even though Elena was only 17 years old at the time of the assaults. According to police records, one of the most alarming incidents had taken place months earlier. Gokhan had called Elena, demanding that she come to see him. When she refused, he became enraged and appeared at her house wielding a knife, shouting her name in the street. Out of fear and shame, Elena agreed to go with him, hoping to prevent her family from discovering what was happening. Once inside his car, Gokhan drove her to one of his bachelor apartments. There, in a fit of jealousy, he demanded to see her phone. Elena told him she had left it at home. That simple answer provoked another violent outburst. Gokhan struck her, seized the keys to her house, and prevented her from leaving. Terrified and trembling, Elena eventually managed to escape. Overwhelmed by despair, she ran to the same construction site where she had previously tried to end her life in 2020. After gathering all this information, the police finally moved to arrest Gokhan and his son. Both were taken into custody for questioning. During his interrogation, Gokhan appeared calm and self-assured. In court, he claimed that he and Elena had been in a mutual relationship for about a year, insisting that their connection was consensual. Gokhan tried to paint a very different picture of events. According to his version, Elena had called him 2 days before her death, saying her mother was in a rehabilitation center and that she needed to buy supplies but couldn't afford them. He claimed that they met. He bought what she needed and even accompanied her to visit her mother in the hospital. Later that night, they met again, though he insisted that nothing intimate happened between them. The next day, he said, they saw each other once more, went shopping for hospital items, and he then dropped her off at home. Gokhan told the court he had repeatedly tried to end their relationship, but that Elena would threaten to harm herself whenever he attempted to leave. He also accused her of drinking heavily and insisted that on the day of her death, he was at home the entire time, proof of which, he said, could be found in the security camera footage from his apartment building. He ended his testimony with a defiant remark. The truth will come out at the end of the investigation. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading quickly across the city. Rumors involving his son. Several sources claimed that Göktürk, after learning of Elena's death, had shown up drunk at the scene carrying a knife. It was then that police arrested him. During questioning, Göktürk told investigators that Elena had been a close friend from school. He admitted that in recent months he had learned through mutual friends that his father and Elena were having a relationship. Shocked and disgusted, he said he had not spoken to his father for 4 months. But on September 29th, the night before Elena's death, the situation reached a breaking point for him. Overwhelmed by the gossip and humiliation, he decided to confront her directly. He tried to call her 9 times, but she never answered. He then attempted to reach his father, who also ignored his calls and messages. When he heard the devastating news the next day, that Elena had died, Göktürk took a taxi home. Soon after, he learned that both he and his father were wanted by the police. he decided to surrender voluntarily. In his statement, he said he had been carrying the knife only because he feared retaliation from Alina's family. 3 days after Alina's death, Gökturk was released without charges, while Gökhan was freed under judicial supervision. The court imposed minor restrictions. He was required to report regularly and forbidden to leave the province or the country. The decision sent shockwaves through the community. Friends and relatives of Alina were outraged. Her father, Kemal, publicly accused the authorities of orchestrating a cover-up. Speaking to the local press, he declared that the narrative of suicide was false, that his daughter had been murdered. He insisted that her body bore no fractures consistent with a fall, claiming the evidence pointed to foul play. Rumors had also begun circulating through the city that Gökhan had a mistress, a nurse, who may have used her medical knowledge to help him carry out a plan to end Alina's life. Kemal reminded everyone who would listen that Alina had just turned 18, had been preparing for university, and was full of dreams for the future. He insisted that his daughter never drank alcohol, yet the autopsy report revealed high levels of alcohol in her blood. He was convinced she had been forced to drink that night, perhaps to weaken her or to stage her death. Still, some of the father's claims conflicted with forensic findings. According to the official autopsy, Alina's body showed severe injuries consistent with a fall from a great height. There were fractures in her skull, ribs, and thoracic vertebrae, as well as internal bleeding. The medical examiner concluded that her death was caused by blunt force trauma from the fall. After the autopsy, Alina's body was released to her family. Her funeral was held quietly at the local cemetery, where hundreds gathered to mourn. But sorrow quickly turned to anger when the court allowed Gökhan to remain free under judicial supervision. The district prosecutor objected to this decision and appealed to a higher criminal court, yet the appeal was rejected. Gökhan stayed out of prison for the moment. Despite this setback, prosecutors pressed forward with a deeper investigation. They analyzed Alina's phones and social media accounts, uncovering a disturbing digital trail. The messages between her and Gökhan showed clear evidence of blackmail, manipulation, and threats. Alina had lived in constant fear, forced to obey him under the weight of his intimidation. When police searched Gökhan's home, they noticed something suspicious. His cell phone was missing. Investigators believed he had hidden or destroyed it, knowing it likely contained the incriminating videos and photos he used to control Alina. 8 days after her death, armed with the new findings, the court issued an arrest warrant. Gökhan was taken back into custody, now facing multiple charges: incitement to suicide, blackmail, intentional injury, threats, defamation, and violation of privacy. In a new statement, Gökhan repeated that he and Alina had a romantic relationship, insisting their encounters were consensual. But his story changed again. This time, he admitted they had been intimate on the night before her death. He also claimed that on the morning she died, they went to a pharmacy together to buy a pill to prevent pregnancy, an attempt, he said, to resolve a problem between them. Gökhan maintained his innocence, but the growing pile of contradictions only strengthened the prosecution's case. The court ordered him held in custody as the investigation expanded into 2 separate trials, one for blackmail and physical assault, and another for incitement to suicide. The first trial began in April 2022. During the third hearing, the defense once again argued that Gökhan was innocent, portraying the relationship as mutual and voluntary. The accused appeared by video link from prison, emotionless and composed. When the verdict was read, there was outrage. The court sentenced Gökhan, then 43, to 2 years in prison and a $300 fine for blackmail, plus 4 additional months for assault. Alina's family called the ruling an insult. Their lawyer denounced the verdict as incomplete, arguing that the court ignored the evidence of sexual violence and other victims. Then, in July 2022, the second and most crucial verdict arrived. The court found Gökhan guilty of incitement to suicide, a charge equivalent to intentional homicide in Turkish law when threats or coercion are involved. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The courtroom erupted in tears and applause. At last, justice seemed within reach. Under Turkish law, a life sentence without parole means a minimum of 24 years behind bars, though prisoners convicted of crimes as severe as Gökhan's rarely receive early release. His defense appealed the decision, but in October 2024, 3 years after Alena's death, the appeals court upheld the life sentence. Gökhan was officially declared responsible for the death of Alena. The verdict brought a measure of peace to her grieving family and became a landmark in Turkey's ongoing struggle against gender-based violence. Women's rights organizations across the country hailed the ruling as a victory, not just for Alena, but for every victim whose cries for help had been ignored. Today, Alena's name is remembered as a symbol of that struggle. Her tragic death and her desperate attempts to seek help continue to echo throughout Turkey. Alena's voice, silenced too soon, now speaks for thousands of women still fighting to be heard. Two hooded figures sprint through the affluent streets of Woodland Hills, California. It's 4:53 in the afternoon on January 23, 2017. Blood is still fresh on their hands. Behind them, in the backyard of a $1 million mansion, a celebrated hairstylist lies dying on his own patio, multiple stab wounds to his neck, face, and chest. At that exact moment, his teenage daughter is driving home from school, completely unaware that she's about to discover a nightmare that will haunt her forever. This is the story of Fabio Cementilli, a successful, charismatic Italian immigrant who built an empire in the beauty industry. But more importantly, this is the story of ultimate betrayal, a story of greed, obsession, and calculated murder orchestrated by the person who was supposed to love him most. If you're a fan of true crime and criminal investigations, you won't want to miss our new book, The Ultimate Book of Serial Killers: 180 Files of the World's Most Notorious Murderers, now available on Amazon. You can also purchase the PDF version directly from our website for instant download. You'll find the link in the video description and in a pinned comment. Now, let's dive into today's case. January 23, 2017. The 911 call came in at 4:54 p.m. a teenage girl's voice trembling with absolute terror, desperate to save her father's life. 16-year-old Isabella Cementilli had just returned home from school to find her father, Fabio, lying in a pool of blood on their backyard patio. The scene was horrific. Multiple stab wounds painted a brutal picture of violence. As paramedics rushed to the scene, Isabella's screams echoed through the neighborhood. But it was too late. Fabio Cementilli, age 49, was pronounced dead. At first glance, this appeared to be a burglary gone horribly wrong. Two hooded figures had been captured on a neighbor's security camera just minutes before the attack, jogging toward the Cementilli home at 4:18 p.m. Fabio's black Porsche was missing from the driveway, later found abandoned 5 miles away with blood droplets inside. But as investigators processed the crime scene, something didn't add up. Detective Ryan Werner of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department studied the evidence carefully. Fabio's expensive Rolex remained untouched on his wrist. His wallet sat undisturbed in his pocket. Nothing else was missing from the luxury home. No ransacked drawers, no emptied safes, no signs of forced entry. The timeline was surgically precise. At 4:18 p.m., security cameras captured two figures jogging toward the house. At 4:53 p.m., the black Porsche speeds away. At 4:54 p.m., just 60 seconds later, Isabella's car pulls into the driveway. It was almost as if someone knew exactly when Fabio would be alone and vulnerable. 3 days after the murder, Monica Cementilli held a memorial service for her husband. Friends and family gathered in the same backyard where Fabio had been brutally killed, mourning a man who had touched so many lives through his work in the beauty industry. Monica appeared devastated. She could barely speak coherent sentences, repeatedly saying, "I'm not a wife anymore. I'm not a wife anymore." Her grief seemed overwhelming, all-consuming. But one person at the memorial didn't belong. Monica's friend, Deborah Obard, noticed him immediately. A man she'd never seen before, mingling with the grieving family. Something about him felt profoundly wrong. He didn't fit with Fabio's circle of friends and colleagues. Yet there he was, offering condolences, completely out of place. And he had a bandage on his left index finger. Obard was so disturbed by his presence that she secretly photographed him and handed the image to police. That single photograph would crack the case wide open. The mystery man's name was Robert Louis Baker. Within weeks, investigators discovered something crucial. Baker's DNA was already in law enforcement databases. He was a registered sex offender. When they compared his DNA to the blood droplets found inside Fabio's stolen Porsche, they got a perfect match. But the question remained: who was Robert Baker, and why would he want Fabio Cementilli dead? The answer would expose a web of lies, obsession, and betrayal that had been spinning for over a year. Robert Louis Baker, age 53, was not who he appeared to be. He worked as a racquetball coach at LA Fitness in West Hills, charismatic, confident, magnetic, with what one acquaintance described as a very alpha male presence and kind of a sexual thing about him. He seemed successful, well-liked, always ready with advice or encouragement. But beneath that polished surface lurked a much darker truth. In 1993, Baker had been convicted of lewd and lascivious acts with a minor, his own teenage stepdaughter. After serving his prison sentence, he married the victim, and both entered the adult film industry together. By 2016, he was working as a fitness instructor, projecting an image of respectability while his predatory past remained hidden. That's when he first laid eyes on Monica Cementilli. Monica, age 45, represented everything Baker craved: She was elegant, sophisticated, married to a successful man, living the affluent lifestyle he desperately wanted for himself. She had two teenage daughters and seemed devoted to her husband of over 20 years. According to Baker's later testimony, their affair began just weeks after they met at the gym in early 2016. What Monica didn't realize was that she had just become the obsession of a sexual predator who had already destroyed one family and was prepared to destroy another. Baker immediately moved to isolate Monica from her normal life. He convinced her to communicate exclusively through encrypted apps like Viber and burner phones, technology that would hide their relationship from Fabio. Investigators would later discover that half of all Monica's communications were with Robert Baker, more than with her husband and two daughters combined. Let that sink in for a moment. Half of her digital life was devoted to this man. Monica's friend Deborah Obard grew suspicious in the fall of 2016. She noticed Monica spending increasing amounts of time at the gym, always around the same man. When she confronted Monica about the affair, Monica vehemently denied everything. Obard then warned Fabio to watch Monica's gym friends. His response was heartbreaking in hindsight. He dismissed the concern entirely. He trusted his wife completely. After 20 years of marriage, he believed she would never betray him. If only he had known that at that very moment, Robert Baker was already planning his murder. In late 2016, Christopher Austin flew from Oregon to Los Angeles. His airline ticket was paid for by Robert Baker. Austin was 36 years old and worked as a parole and probation officer with at-risk youth. He considered Baker a longtime friend and thought he was visiting for a casual trip. Maybe some racquetball, some California sunshine. He had absolutely no idea he was being recruited for murder. Austin would later testify that Monica invited both men to her home for dinner. She served pizza and gave them a detailed tour of the house, paying special attention to the backyard patio where Fabio liked to relax by the pool after work. She showed them the layout, the exits, the blind spots. It was reconnaissance disguised as hospitality. Around the same time, Monica contacted a security camera company to upgrade their home surveillance system. The new system allowed her to remotely access the cameras from her cell phone anywhere, anytime. She would know exactly when Fabio was home alone and vulnerable. Baker's preparations were even more sinister. He purchased GPS tracking devices and secretly placed them on both of Fabio's vehicles, his daily driver and his prized black Porsche. Baker could monitor Fabio's every movement in real time, tracking him like prey. Austin testified that Baker told him Monica was trapped in an abusive relationship and desperately wanted Fabio gone. Baker painted Fabio as a controlling, violent husband who was making Monica's life miserable. He positioned himself as Monica's savior, protecting her from a dangerous situation. But Monica's daughter Jessica would later provide testimony that shattered this narrative. She described walking into her mother's bedroom one morning in 2016 and finding Robert Baker in her mother's bed. This wasn't about rescuing Monica from abuse. This wasn't about protection or safety. This was about possession. Baker wanted Monica all to himself, her life, her money, her complete attention, and he was willing to kill to get it. The financial motive was staggering. Fabio had a life insurance policy worth $1.6 million. If he died, Monica would collect everything. She could start fresh with Baker. No messy divorce, no custody battles, no splitting assets. Just a widow and her new boyfriend, funded by blood money. The planning phase was complete. All they needed now was the perfect opportunity. January 22, 2017, the day before the murder. Monica sent Baker a text message. Fabio was heading to the store. According to Christopher Austin's testimony, this was their first attempt to kill Fabio. Baker and Austin positioned themselves to intercept him, weapons ready, adrenaline pumping. But something went wrong. Austin later said he couldn't go through with the attack that day. Perhaps his conscience finally kicked in, or perhaps the logistics weren't right. Whatever the reason, Fabio returned home safely that evening, completely unaware that his wife had just tried to have him murdered. But Baker wasn't giving up. He had come too far, invested too much. Monica had promised him a new life together, access to the insurance money, freedom from his own financial struggles. He told Austin about Monica's wealth, saying once Fabio was gone, they could disappear together and live the life they deserved. The plan was straightforward. Make it look like a burglary, collect the insurance money, and start over somewhere else. That night, Monica's behavior revealed her true priorities. While comforting her daughters and playing the role of devoted wife, she was already planning Fabio's funeral in her mind. The performance had begun. The trap was set. Fabio Cementilli had less than 24 hours to live. January 23, 2017, the day that would destroy multiple families forever. Monica's plan required perfect timing and an airtight alibi. That afternoon, she left home in her black Ford pickup truck, telling Fabio she was going shopping at Target. A routine errand, nothing suspicious. Surveillance cameras captured her truck entering the Target parking lot around 4 p.m. But before Monica entered the store, someone got into her vehicle. Prosecutors believe that person was Robert Baker, receiving final instructions for the murder. Monica then went inside Target, establishing her alibi while texting Baker that the coast was clear. Fabio was home alone. Baker received the signal and told Austin, "She's going to the store. We have a small window." Austin testified that Baker put him in the trunk of a rented Nissan and drove to a staging area near the Cementilli home. When they arrived, Baker handed Austin a knife and asked, "Are you with me?" Austin would later tell the jury, "Like a dummy, I said yeah, and followed him." At 4:18 p.m., they jogged toward the house like two fitness enthusiasts out for afternoon exercise, the perfect disguise captured on multiple security cameras throughout the neighborhood. Austin testified that Baker told him the front door should be unlocked. "She's going to leave the door open," he said. When prosecutors asked who she was, Austin replied without hesitation, "The defendant." The door was indeed unlocked, just as planned. Fabio Cementilli was sitting peacefully on his backyard patio, relaxing by the pool after another successful day as vice president at Weller, one of the world's leading beauty companies. He had built an empire through talent and determination, working with Hollywood stars and mentoring young stylists who idolized him. He never saw them coming. Robert Baker fatally stabbed Fabio multiple times in his neck, face, and chest. The attack was so vicious that Baker cut his own finger in the process, the same finger that would be bandaged when he brazenly appeared at Fabio's memorial service just 3 days later. Fabio had no defensive wounds, suggesting he was taken completely by surprise by men he had never seen before, sent by the woman who had promised to love him forever. Baker and Austin fled in Fabio's Porsche, abandoning it 5 miles away. The timeline was perfect, choreographed like a deadly ballet. At 4:53 p.m., the killers drove away. At 4:54 p.m., exactly 60 seconds later, Isabella's car pulled into the driveway. Isabella's screams echoed through the neighborhood as she discovered her father's body and called 911. The operator guided her through desperate attempts to save Fabio's life, but the wounds were too severe. He was already gone. Monica arrived home minutes later to find police cars and ambulances surrounding her house. Her performance began immediately. When Monica's friend Elise Bluel arrived at the house that evening, a stranger escorted her inside with a chilling warning: "Don't step in the blood." Monica appeared utterly devastated. Bluel remembered her sitting there, unable to form coherent sentences. "I'm not a wife anymore," she kept repeating. "I'm not a wife anymore." It became her mantra, as if she were processing an unimaginable shock. But while Monica publicly grieved, she was privately celebrating. That very night, with her husband's body not even cold, she began asking about Fabio's life insurance policy. She wanted to know when the $1.6 million would be released. Her priorities were crystal clear. The money came first. The grief was just an elaborate performance. For months, Monica maintained her widowed victim facade while secretly continuing her passionate affair with Baker. Police surveillance captured them taking romantic trips to Las Vegas and Myrtle Beach. Monica introduced herself to Baker's friends as Monica Baker. She was already living the fantasy of their new life together, built on her husband's blood money. Monica called Detective Jean Parcell repeatedly, but not to seek justice for her murdered husband. She asked for updates on DNA evidence and estimates of when the insurance policy money could be released. She wasn't concerned about catching Fabio's killers. She was concerned about collecting her payout. But investigators were watching everything, documenting every move, every phone call, every romantic rendezvous. And the web of lies was about to collapse. By February 2017, Robert Baker was the prime suspect. His DNA in Fabio's stolen Porsche was undeniable, damning evidence. When investigators questioned Monica about him, she claimed she barely knew the man. She told detectives she wasn't even sure of his last name. She only knew him as Rob, a casual acquaintance from the gym. When confronted with Baker's blood evidence in the Porsche, Monica fabricated an elaborate story. She claimed she had accidentally hit him with a racquetball racket during a game and brought a bloody towel home from the gym. It was absurd, desperate, and investigators weren't buying it for a second. For months, they conducted surveillance on the secret lovers, documenting their continued relationship while Monica played grieving widow in public. The evidence was mounting. Encrypted communications on burner phones, GPS tracking device purchases, and most damning of all, their ongoing romance while Fabio's body was barely cold. On June 14, 2017, police staged an elaborate sting operation. Monica and Baker were pulled over under the pretense of a routine traffic stop. Officers claimed their car might be stolen and needed to be checked. Both suspects were handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car equipped with recording devices. What they said to each other in that moment would later be used against them in court. They were then arrested and formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. As they were processed into custody, the full weight of the evidence against them became clear. Monica was also placed with an undercover officer posing as a cellmate. She confided, "He's not just my lover, he's my confidant, he's my everything." Even behind bars, their twisted love affair continued. Police intercepted jail letters where Monica signed herself Mrs. Baker and Monica Baker. In one particularly disturbing letter, she wrote, "It kind of hurts to not be touched, or fucked, or licked, or loved by you." In recorded jail conversations, Baker told Monica, "I love you, baby. I really do." They were so obsessed with each other that they continued planning their future together even while facing murder charges. The delusion was complete. The trial of Monica Cementilli began with devastating testimony from Christopher Austin, the parole officer who had helped commit the murder. In exchange for a plea deal, Austin agreed to testify against Monica. His testimony was damning. He described the reconnaissance mission disguised as a dinner invitation, how Monica had specifically shown them the backyard where Fabio would later die. He recounted Baker's promises of insurance money, but in a stunning twist, Robert Baker himself testified for Monica's defense. In an apparent attempt to save her, he claimed she had no knowledge of the murder plot. Baker insisted he had acted alone because he was obsessed with her, wanting her to be around him and with him more, like all the time. Baker's testimony created some reasonable doubt, but prosecutors had overwhelming circumstantial evidence. The GPS tracking devices, the unlocked door, the perfectly timed alibi at Target, the immediate inquiries about insurance money, the romantic getaways while Fabio's family mourned. It all pointed to Monica as the mastermind. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman told jurors the case was fundamentally about betrayal. Monica had deceived everyone: her husband, her children, her friends, investigators. She had orchestrated every detail of the murder. The prosecution made a particularly powerful argument about Monica's behavior after the murder. She left her teenage daughters at home that night, seemingly unconcerned about the dangerous burglars who had just killed their father. Why? Because there was no real danger. She knew exactly who the killers were. Monica's defense attorney argued she was guilty of stupidity, duplicity, lying, adultery, but not murder. He claimed she was simply a foolish woman caught up in an affair, manipulated by Baker's obsession. The jury would have to decide: was Monica an innocent victim of Baker's fixation, or the calculating mastermind who orchestrated her husband's brutal murder for money and passion? On April 11, 2025, after 8 hours of deliberation over 3 days, the jury reached their verdict: guilty. First-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, with special circumstances of murder for financial gain and lying in wait, charges that carried mandatory life without parole. On June 23, 2025, Monica Cementilli was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made a point of stating, "In listening to the evidence in this matter, I do find that the defendant was the mastermind in this conspiracy to commit murder." Robert Baker had already been sentenced to life without parole after pleading no contest. Christopher Austin received 16 years to life for his cooperation with prosecutors. Monica Cementilli traded 20 years of marriage, her family's future, and her freedom for a fantasy built on blood and betrayal. Her daughters lost both parents, one to murder, one to greed and obsession. They must now navigate life knowing their mother orchestrated their father's death. Fabio's son Luigi, from his first marriage, keeps his father's Rolex close. "He wore this all the time," Luigi says. "He wore it when he died. I wear it for special occasions when I want to feel close to him." That Rolex, the one the killers could have easily stolen but left behind, has become a symbol of what this case was never really about. This wasn't a burglary. It wasn't about watches or wallets or material possessions. It was about a woman who wanted everything: passion, excitement, money, a new life, and was willing to destroy her family to get it. Fabio Cementilli had built a beautiful life through hard work and determination. He mentored young stylists, worked with Hollywood stars, and loved his family deeply. Several scholarships and educational programs now bear his name, ensuring his legacy of kindness continues. But his life was cut short at age 49 by the person who knew him best, loved him least, and wanted his money most. In the end, Monica got exactly what she wanted: a life with Robert Baker, just not the one she imagined. Instead of luxury vacations and insurance money, they'll spend the rest of their lives in separate prison cells, their twisted love affair reduced to monitored phone calls and letters read by guards. This case serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest danger can come from those closest to us, from the person sleeping beside us, sharing our home, raising our children, the person who promises to love us until death do us part. Sometimes they mean it more literally than we could ever imagine. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.